Right. Good morning, and I trust everyone is doing good. And uh, I believe you are going to join me in this live Facebook video broadcast. And we are not going to keep long because I got some place to go. But whatever it is, we can still do some studies. I know as far as the man of sin, the little horn, and so forth and so on is concerned. And so that is what we are going to do. So quickly, let's turn our Bible to the book of Daniel, and we are going to look at Daniel chapter number 7, and we are going to start at verse uh, maybe verse 8, up to verse 11, because that is where you know uh, you progress from this verse down to the very end of the chapter. And so in Daniel chapter number 7, this is what we have there. It says that I was considering the horns. So there were horns, the 10 horns, what many believe to be the 10 generals of Israel. Others believe that it is the kings of the 10 Caesars of Roman Empire and so on and so forth. But the I lean to those horns being related to Israel because of what I'm going to talk about. All right, now, apart from these 10 horns, there was another horn, a little one. So apart from this horn, there is a little one. All right, so it depends on where you place this little horn. If this little horn belongs to Israel, then of course the 10 horns, uh, or excuse me, the 10 horns also belongs to Israel, because you can't have one horn belonging to Israel and another horns, belonging to the Roman Empire. All right. So among these 10 horns were a little one, or apart from these 10 horns were a little horn, coming up among them. So he's not coming from different horns. He's coming out from, or he's coming out of these 10 horns. So we are talking about the same horns, having the same origin, the same root, and so on and so forth, coming up among them, before whom three of the first horns were plucked out by the roots. And there in this horn were eyes like a man, so were eyes like the eyes of a man. So this certain horn has an eye like, or got some, has eyes like that of a man, and a mouth speaking pompous words. So it was right. This little horn was blasphemous, spoke pompously, and so on and so forth. So Ali, this give us some clue as to what or who this little horn is. One, it spoke pompously, and again, it has eyes like that of a man. All right, so now we get to verse 9. It says that I watched till the thrones were put in place and the ancient of days were seated. So this is judgment scene. Okay, now this is the Lord sitting on his throne. Now, what occurs or what happens when the Lord sits on his throne? He judges the surrounding nations. Okay, this is also what we call the Feast of Trumpet, or what we call the sounding of the trumpet, and so on and so forth. Now, remember, in Matthew chapter number 25, verse 30, 31, following, it says that the Lord will come and he will sit on a throne and he is going to judge the surrounding nation. So this is where the whole thing, stems from. The Lord is seated on his throne, and when he is seated on his throne, he's going to judge the surrounding nation. So when we talk about um, 2 Corinthians chapter 5, 2 Corinthians chapter 5, and the, excuse me. All right. So when you talk about 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 10, and then also the great white throne judgment in Revelation chapter 20, verse 11, see, all of them are quoting Daniel chapter number 7 because it is the time when the Lord sits on his throne to judge the surrounding nations. Okay, so and what are the nations? What are these nations? Is it the nations of 21st century or the nations of the first century? All right, so in the context, will tell you that it is not 21st century, but however, it is the nations that existed when Daniel made this prophecy. So we are talking about the nations of the first century, not 21st century, by the way. All right, so now it says that so the Lord has taken his throne and he is seated on, and so he's now going to judge. So it says that um, his garment was white as snow, and the hair of his head was like a pure wool. His throne was a fiery one. Now that is an apocalyptic language that indicates okay the nature of the judgment that our Lord was going to unleash upon this little horn, upon this 10 horns as well as the little horn. So uh, we have to understand it that way. Each hills were burning fire, just like that. While when that took Elijah up to heaven. And just remember when Philistines were made an attempt to go war against Israel, you know what happened. Okay, there it says that Elisha. That was the day of Elisha. It says that the servant of Elisha was afraid, and so the Lord prayed that he should open the eye of this young man so that he will see uh, what is beyond the physical realm. So he opened his eye and he saw that mighty angels, in chariot. Okay, that is the Lord attending that battle. The Lord is going to go forth and is going to fight for Israel, and they will overcome their enemy. So this is what is happening here. Okay, and so this is the Lord, preparing for judgment. Okay, and that judgment is going to go against this little horn as well as the 10 horns, because when you read down the text, it's going to tell us the behavior of this little horn, what they were doing, okay, against the saint, and why Ancient of the Day took his seat, to judge them. Now, a fiery stream is issued and came forth from before him. So that is the judgment scene, and and came forth before him. Thousands ministered to him. 10,000s and 10,000s stood before him. The court was seated and books were opened. So when you come to the New Testament and you hear anything about the opening of the books in 2 Corinthians chapter 5 and Revelation chapter 20, you don't think about something literal, something like a time will come when God is going to open books, to judge us. No, that is a judgment scene. That is Feast of Trumpet. Now you can read about the feast days and they are going to give you a clue as to what this indicates. Okay, so this is judgment scene. The Lord has taken his seat and he is going to judge, but this judgment is upon the little horn especially, as well as the 10 horns. So let us understand that let us understand, this now. Now, so in verse 11, it says that I watched them because of the sound of the pompous words which the horn was speaking. So the little horn continue, speaking pompously. Okay, he's continue. He did not stop doing that, but he continued with his blasphemous words. And I watched till the beast was slain, and its body was given to was destroyed. Its body was destroyed and given to the burning flame. Now, so when you read Revelation chapter number 12, and I believe verse 12 and 13, it talks about the little horn. It talks about the burning that occurred against the beast. Okay, so here we have the little horn being destroyed at the time of judgment, at the time when the Lord is seated, is seated on a throne, and so its body was given to the flaming fire. I believe that is the same flaming fire of 2 Thessalonians chapter 1, verse 8, and also Matthew chapter 22, verse 1 through to 8. And that flaming fire was against, those who persecuted the church. It was against those who killed those who were sent to them. And they were the Israelites, okay, don't believe in Jews, the apostate ones that, disturbed and bothered the church so much that many died as a result of this persecution. Okay, upon them comes this judgment. So understand what we are talking about now. Because of for the time being, let us move down to the verse. So now we've realized that this little horn, spoke pompously again. Um, it got an eye like an eye of a man, and also there was a judgment against this little horn. But when we move down to verse 17, now verse 13 and 14, it talks about the judgment against it, when the Lord comes in the clouds of heaven, okay, to pronounce or make judgment against this little horn. And so we know in the New Testament that the coming of the Lord in the clouds of heaven, is posited upon or comes upon the unbelieving Jews, in the first century. So what we are talking about is first century uh, fulfillment or prophecy that was fulfilled in the first century. Okay, so again, now you can look out to that, but when you move down to the verse, at least to verse 17, it said that those great beasts which are four kings which arise out of the earth. Now, many believe that, many appeal to Revelation 17 to talk about the 10 kings, okay, to be the Caesar. But I believe that, it has to do with Israel, the kings of Israel at the time. Because remember, in Psalm 2, verse 1 to 12, David had spoken about the kings of the earth who ought to make peace with the Messiah, lest he unleash his wrath against them. And also in First Corinthians chapter 2, verse 6, and also verse 8, Paul said that the kings of the earth, that is the land of Palestine, by the way, their rulership is coming to nothing. Why? Because the Lord is going to come against them and is going to destroy them. So I believe that the kings that we have here is not related to the Caesars, but rather the kings of Israel. That is what I believe. Okay. So now, out of the earth now, but the saints of the Most High shall receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever, even forever and ever. So that time of judgment, the time when the Lord sits on his throne to judge, is also the time when the saint will possess the kingdom. Now, when we come to Luke chapter 21, verse 31, it says that when you see Jerusalem being judged, look up and say, the kingdom of God draw nigh. That will be the time of the possession of the kingdom by the saints. Okay. And also in Matthew chapter 21, verse 42, 43, it says that because Israel rejected the Messiah to the point of orchestrating his crucifixion, the kingdom was going to be taken away from them and be given to that nation that is bearing the fruit. Okay, so that the time of the time when the Lord usurped the kingdom from Israel occurs in the time of judgment. And also remember, the time of the reception of the kingdom is tied to the time of the return of the Lord. That also includes the time of judgment and resurrection. All this occurs concurrently as far as 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 1 is also concerned. So let us understand that and let us, move on. Again, so there's a possession of the kingdom, by the saint that occurs in connection with the time of judgment. By the way, now verse 9, they said that I wish to know the truth about the fourth beast. I wish to know the truth about the fourth beast, which is different from all the others, exceedingly great and dreadful, with teeth of iron and with nails of bronze, which devoured and broke in pieces and trampled on the residue with its feet. And then the 10 horns that were on its head, and the other horn which came up, that is the little horn, which came out, before which three fell, namely that horn which had eyes and a mouth which spoke pompous words. So again, we have not deviated from the little horn, which was greater than his fellows. See, now verse 20. So I was watching, and the same horn, so that is the little horn, was making the same horn was what's happening? The same horn was making was making war against the saints and prevailed against them. So this horn made war against the saints and he prevailed, against them. He prevailed, against them. So what happened at the time? He prevailed against them. Now, when we come to the New Testament, we see the apostles, going around with their duty to proclaim the gospel. But in the midst of the proclamation of the gospel, were this persecutions and was this afflictions and a lot of things that were meted out to them by the unbelievers. Okay, so that was the time of the war. In Revelation chapter 12, it said that war broke out in heaven. It's that same war of Ephesians chapter 6, verse 12, when Paul said that they wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against the principalities and authorities of this, the darkness of the age. And the darkness of the age is that which characterizes Judaism. It was the individual authorities those that occupied that lofty places in the world of the Jews in the first century. So when you read Luke chapter 22, verse 52, you realize that the darkness of the age where the where has to do with Judaism, has to do with the authorities and so on and so forth. In Colossians chapter 2, verse 11 down to 15, you realize that the authorities, the principalities, were those who were in the first century. Those authorities, they were the those individual authority, the Caiaphas, the Annas, and so on and so forth. They were another high temporal official. They were the authority, the principalities of that darkness of the age. So these are the ones that which Paul and apostles were wrestling against. And remember, they killed many of them. They prevailed against them. But of course, God came. Of course, some also made it to the end. And Christ did not, hide it from them. It says that, well, in the course of the promulgation of the gospel, you guys are going to be faced with, this tribulation. But those who will make it to the end will be saved. Okay, those who depart the faith will be destroyed. He who loves to save his life will lose it, and he who loses his life for the cause of the gospel will also find it when the ancient of day has come. In Matthew chapter number 10, I believe verse 30, 30 following. But also in Matthew chapter number 10, verse 20 to 23, Jesus forewarned them, the impending tribulation in the course of the discharge of their duty to promote the gospel throughout the world in the first century, that they will be persecuted. However, if they go to one city and they are persecuted, they should be quick to go to another city. And it says that assuredly, I say to you that those apostles will not have gone through the cities of Old Covenant Israel before the Lord comes in Matthew chapter number 10, verse 23. So it means that that time when the Lord comes, or that time of the parousia, the time of the return of the Lord occurs in the first century, because it will be the time when the Lord comes to rescue those who are being persecuted by the unbelievers, those to whom the Lord sent them to promote or to preach the gospel to them, in turning them away from the evils of their way. That is the unbelieving Jews. Some of them will not believe to the extent of even killing him. Okay, just as they did to him. Because remember, it says that if they hate you, remember that they did that to me first. Okay, so they are going to suffer the same fate. And the Lord has promised them in Luke chapter 24, verse 20, says that just as the Lord, suffered to enter into his glory, whoever follows suit will also enjoy and be in that same glory with him. Paul in Acts chapter number 14, verse 26, 26 or 24, it says that with many tribulation we must enter into the Lord's glory. So this is what was happening. This war that the little horn made against the saint was prevailing, or did prevail, in the first century, or it was fulfilled in the first century, especially after the Lord had departed, and in the course of the Great Tribulation. That was the time when they experienced this. So remember, some of them were killed, just as it says that the little horn prevailed, against them. But what happens after this? What happens after this? It says that until the ancient of day came, and judgment was made in favor of the saint of the Most High, and the time came for the saint to possess the kingdom. Now, when will be the time of the kingdom, and in what event will occasion the reception of the kingdom? Luke chapter number 21 is that judgment against Israel. That judgment was ordained by Christ. Christ came a second time in that judgment against those little horn, against Israel, against the apostate Israel, against those who were making war against the saints. Okay, so that is what is happening here. Now remember, the time of the return of the Lord is the time of judgment, resurrection, and the kingdom. All of them occurring at that same time frame. Okay, at that same time frame. So this is how we have to, or we ought to understand it, not to uh, make some things out of this. But so whatever you read in the New Testament is actually that which were predicted by the prophet of the Lord in the first century, and so or in the prophet or in the Old Testament. So this is how we have to understand that, and so was the case. Okay, now so I haven't noticed this. Now remember, so that time of the that time of the coming of the Lord. So it means that that judgment was made in favor of the saint, but it went against the unbelieving Jews all the way in the first century. So the little horn, the one making war and prevailing against the saint of the Most High God, was and it was the old covenant apostate Israel. Remember in Matthew chapter number 23, it is stated that Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you who killed the prophet, including those who are sent to you, how I have loved to gather you under my wing, as the hen does, but you were not willing. See, your house is left to you a desolate, and their house, the Jewish house, was the temple. It was desolate. The Lord has withdrew his protection from them, and so it was pulled down and leveled to the ground in that war upon them, in that judgment upon them in AD 70. So this is how this ought to be understood, and to identify this little horn, and that will mean that the 10 horns or whatever, they and the kings are the kings of Israel. The 10 horns were the 10 generals. Okay, those who led Israel legion, against the Roman army, all the way beginning in AD 66, to AD 70. Of course, there was some pocket of war at the fortress of Masada in AD 74, but the focus is upon the city and the holy people, per Daniel chapter 9, verse 24. 70 weeks is declared upon your people and also your city. So the city was destroyed in 70 AD, and that is where focus and attention ought to be, okay, not to go beyond that. But of course, I am not denying that there was, some pocket of war, beyond that. All right, so this is that. But to further prove what this little horn is or was, when you come to Deuteronomy, second Second Thessalonians chapter 2. I just get, I know I was going to blow this things out. Second Thessalonians chapter 2. So let's see what we have there. Now, this little horn who was making war against the saint of Most High God was this same man which has eye like an eyes of a man. Okay, he was making war until the ancient of day, until the Lord came to make judgment against it in favor of the saint Most High God, and that was the time of the possession of the kingdom. And Christ said that when you see this judgment, when you see Israel being destroyed, see that the kingdom of God is at hand. In Luke chapter 21, verse 31. So what we are talking about is something that occurred in the first century, and it is not something that is going to occur in our time, because many are those who believe that there's going to be a war and Gog and Magog and so on and so forth, and they often attribute what is prevailing in our current world as being fulfilling the script, or as that which was spoken by the prophet and being fulfilled in our days. That is not the case. Whatever it is, whatever prophecy you might think of, is that which was fulfilled in connection with the fall of Jerusalem and overthrow of the temple in 70 AD. That is what Jesus said, that when Jerusalem is destroyed, that will be the time when all things written will be fulfilled, including Daniel chapter number 7. That also involved the coming of the one like the Son of Man on the clouds of heaven. So when you read of any return of the Lord in the clouds of heaven, remember that is in association with the time when the time of the damnation. Hello, morning. Hello. So that will be the time of the time of that destruction, which we have to think about. Okay, so as I said in Second Thessalonians chapter number 2, let's see if it will also give us more some clue to identify what this little horn or who this little horn is. Because remember, he spoke pompously and also it has eye like an eye of a man. So now let's see. When we get to Second Thessalonians chapter 2, there were some people who were, first of all, they were part of the church, but they have apostatized. And whilst in apostasy, they have written to the church at Thessalonica, telling them that indeed the day of the Lord has already occurred. This is the argument I made yesterday. These people, they were part of the church, okay? And so they knew that Paul had told them that the day of the Lord occurs in their time, because they could not have mastered that courage to write to them that the day has already occurred if they had not heard it from the apostles. But what Paul did was to correct the timing and the condition that will necessitate or that will occasion the parousia and so on and so forth. So this is what is happening. Now he said that, now, brethren, concerning the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ and our gathering together to him. This is Matthew 24:30, that what the regathering or the elect, by the angels. Okay. So we ask you not to be soon shaken in mind, not to be soon. Okay, so that this letter was written in AD 51. Okay, but there was a time when this is going to take place. So the Thessalonican Jews should not be shaken, should not be shaken or be bothered by what had been written to them. Okay, purportedly telling them that the day had already come. Now, either by the spirit or by the word or by letter, are received from us. Okay, so that means that letters that has it that the Lord has already come wasn't coming from the apostles, as though the day of the Lord had come. Now, the had come is that Greek word enestiken, that has already come. So there were people in the first century who believed that indeed the day of the Lord has already come. And that should tell you that their understanding of the nature of the day of the Lord, the coming of the Lord, is different from that one which we have been made to believe today. Dead bodies out of the ground, the world, whatever, melting. They did not have the same mind. You see, this is how we have to, sometimes when you are studying the scriptures, you have to be mindful of some of these things. Okay, just don't follow what you hear, because there were people who believed this and they were moving on, going about their normal activities. Yet they believed that the day of the Lord has already occurred. That should tell you that the apostles taught them that that day will be a spiritual one. But anyway, now let no one deceive you by that any means, for that day will not come unless the falling away comes first and the man of sin is revealed. So these are the two conditions that ought to occur before the day of the Lord. Before the Lord comes, apostasy must take place first. And when you read Galatians chapter 1, verse 6 following, Paul said that, well, utterly I am astonished that you guys are soon departing from the faith, indicating that the apostasy was already running its course in the first century. In 1 John chapter 2, verse 18, 19, John said that, well, see, this Antichrist, they went out from us. Is that not apostasy? You see, these were the conditions that were being met, okay, in prior to the return of the Lord. And this is how we have to understand it. So we have now realized that apostasy, being one of the conditions for which the Lord will come, was running its course in the first century. I believe 2 Timothy, either chapter 4, verse 10 or chapter 2, verse 10, Paul said that Demas loved the world and so he has departed the faith, indicating that what was predicted, that this ought to take place before the Lord came was already running its course in the first century. Okay, and the reason for which this was happening was because of the great tribulation that the church suffered, prior to the coming of the Ancient of Days in 70 AD to destroy those who have subjected the church to this heinous, tribulation, and and so on and so forth. Okay, so when you read Matthew chapter number 24, verse 9 to 13, Christ gave us the condition for which, or the reason for which many would depart the faith. And so the first century church were encouraged, okay, to sustain or to continue in this tribulation, because they know that the Lord has promised them in Matthew chapter number 10, verse 20-23, that they, in the midst of the tribulation, they will not have gone through the cities of old covenant Israel before the Lord comes. So all this while, they knew that the Lord will come in their time to rescue them. That will be the time of judgment. Daniel chapter number 12, verse 1, the appointed time for tribulation and appointed time for deliverance. And who is the deliverer? In Romans chapter number 10, starting at verse 24 following, Paul said that the deliverer will come out from Zion, in reference to Isaiah chapter 40 verse 10, Isaiah chapter 62 verse 11 and verse 12. So there's a time when that deliverer will come, and that will be the time when he delivers them from this tribulation. And that tribulation which the church suffered in the first century has no rival. It has never occurred again, never would it ever occur. So whatever tumultuous situation that we are undergoing today in 2024 has nothing to do with the Bible. That eschatological tribulation occurred in the first century. Daniel chapter number 12 verse 1, Jeremiah chapter 30 verse 6 to 7, what they call the Jacob trouble. Jesus quoted the prophet and posited this tribulation in lead up to AD 70 judgment upon Israel in Matthew chapter 24 verse 21. So whatever you are going today has nothing to do with the Bible. What was predicted by the prophet was fulfilled in the first century. And Paul's in 1 Thessalonians chapter 3 verse 1 to 5 told the Thessalonians that, look, you yourself know that we were destined to suffer this tribulation. However, do not depart the faith, continue in it, because he who is coming will come and will not tarry in a very, very little while. Hosan, Mikron, Hosan, Hosan. In a very, very little while, he who is coming will come and will not tarry. Hebrew chapter 10, verse 37. So they knew that the day of the Lord was coming. Hebrew chapter 10, verse 25. As you see the day of the Lord coming. So they saw the day of the Lord coming. And so they were encouraged to continue in this tribulation till the Lord has come. Why do you then have the Lord come parousia beyond the first century? Who taught us that? Anyway, so that is the case. So the apostasy was the reason for which, the tribulation was the reason for which the apostasy was rampant in the first century. And Jesus said that the many, in Matthew chapter 24, the many, hoi paloa, the many, reference to the believers who would depart the faith, okay, in the midst of this tribulation. John was in this tribulation. In Revelation chapter number 1 and verse 9, he was in this tribulation. And so in Revelation chapter number 2 verse 10, he has encouraged the Christians that they should continue in this tribulation to the end, even to the point of death, and the Lord will give them that crown. He will give them that reward for being faithful to him. Those who will depart will lose their life when he comes. That is what he told them in Matthew chapter number 10. Okay, but those who will continue to the end, they will be the one to be saved. And the Lord comes, that end comes after the gospel has been preached to the world in the first century, according to Matthew chapter 24, verse 14. And Paul said that, look, this has been fulfilled. This mission has been fulfilled. The word has been preached. The word has been preached to the world in the first century. Romans chapter 1, verse 5 and verse 8. Colossians chapter 1, verse 5 and 6 and verse 23. Romans chapter 16, verse 18. We also have Romans chapter 16, verse 24 to 26, indicating that the end has come, because what will occasion, or what you bring the end, the time of the end has been met. That condition has been met, okay, and that is the preaching of the gospel, in the then known world in the first century. Anyway, so now let's quickly move on. We are not digressing. We are still in what we are talking about, and that is trying to identify the little horn in Daniel chapter 7, which has an eyes like an eyes of a man. That is what we are looking at. And so that condition, that we have dealt with one condition, that is the apostasy. Then we move on to the man of sin, because he says that let no one deceive you, for that day will not come unless the falling away comes first, and the man of sin is revealed, the son of perdition, who opposes and exalts himself above all things that is called God, so that he is worshipped, or that is worshipped, so that he sit as God in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. Now, this is the case. Now, let me tell you this. We have this son, man of sin. Now, remember, in Daniel chapter 7, it said that the little horn is like a man. He has an eye, is like a man. Whom do we have here? We have that man of sin. So you see the correlation between Daniel 7 and 2 Thessalonians 2. Remember, Paul said that he said nothing except that which the prophet and Moses said will come. So I believe that this is a quote from Daniel 7. Now, what is this man doing? This man is opposing. It says that who opposes and exalts himself above all things, that is called God. Now, remember, the little horn spoke pompously. He was arrogant and he was pompous. He thought no one could harm him. Okay, no one could harm him. So he was pompous. Here he sits and opposes himself, who opposes and exalts himself above all things, that is called God. Is that not blasphemy? Is that not pompous attitude? Is that not arrogance? Okay, is it not? This is what the man of sin was doing. Is it not what little horn was doing? Giving orders to kill the saints, prevailing them until the end of day came to destroy him. So he thought no one can destroy him. Okay, when at the Euphrates, Revelation chapter number 16, how would they want to get it? At the Euphrates River, when the Roman army got there, they had thrown this, that bomb, to destroy the wall, because Israel thought that their wall is fortified, that no one can invade and to destroy them. Okay, so that is what occurred at Euphrates. They threw this balls, against the walls, and they broke it down, and they made their way into it, and so on and so forth. Okay, this is the abomination. Abomination of desolation. That is also a quote from Daniel 9, verse 27. Okay, and also Matthew chapter 24, verse 25. Okay, so maybe I'll have to talk about that, by the way. Anyway, so this is what this man was doing. But the thing is that he sits. That is present active indicative verb tense. That means that this man was already sitting. And the temple here is Greek word now, and the now means most holy place. So this man was sitting in the most holy place. See, that is why this man cannot be anything of the Caesars, because none of them had sat in the Jerusalem temple. Okay, until perhaps they had destroyed it and entered it. But when Paul wrote this letter, this man of sin was already sitting in the most holy place. And you know what he said, that is worship, so that he sits as God in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. Now, the reason why he showed himself as God is that it is only the high priest who get close to heaven, who becomes like God. In Exodus chapter number 16, before he enters into the most holy place, he has to pull off his earthly garment, okay, before making it into the most holy place, because that is where the Lord comes in a cloud upon the mercy seat. So when he enters there, he removes his earthly garment and put on that garment of glory, and he transforms as God. So when he enters there, he's just like God. That is why this man of sin, sitting in the most holy place, made himself like God, because that is the understanding. He transformed into God. He metamorphosed into God. He is no more man in the flesh, but he is God in the spirit. That is what the high priest does when he enters into the most holy place, because in Exodus chapter 16, I believe verse 18 downwards, said that no mortal man should enter into the most holy place. They cannot even peep through, into the most holy place, because when he gets there, the Lord comes upon the mercy seat and he communicates with him as God in the spirit. This is why this man of perdition was doing. Now, listen, Paul said that, do you not remember that when I was still with you, I told you these things? So Paul was telling the Thessalonians, he was not talking to me in 2024. He was telling them these things. So they were aware and they knew who this person was. Do you not remember that when I was still with you, I told you these things? Now you know what is restraining, that he may be revealed in his own time. That own time is what we call the day and hour no man knows of Matthew chapter number 24. So that day and hour when this man will be revealed and destroyed is in that 70 AD. Now, what was restraining him, I have made a video on it. I have recorded a video on it. That is the Torah. It was the law. Because so long as the law had validity, God still had marriage contract with Israel. So the destruction of the temple alongside the Torah put an end to this marriage contract. Okay, and so that was when God severed, that relationship, and this man was revealed, and it was destroyed in that judgment. Anyway, now you know that, so we've known the restraints. Right? He said that for the mystery of the lawlessness is already at work. Only he who now restrain you will do so until he is taken out of the way. And then the lawless one will be revealed when the Lord will consume with the breath of his mouth and destroy him. So how can this be a first century? How can this be a 2024 thing? How can this be a first century thing? When the coming of the Lord will be the time when he destroyed this man of sin who was sitting in the most holy place in the Jerusalem temple. Where is the Jerusalem temple now? It said it will never be rebuilt. Jeremiah chapter 3, 16, 17, and John chapter number 4. It will never be rebuilt. So where is this man of sin? The coming of the Lord is to destroy this man of sin. Where is the most holy place? Where is the Jerusalem temple? How can Vatican be the most holy place? Christ and Paul never knew what is called Roman Catholic Church. Neither did they know what is called Vatican. They did not have in mind until Catholic Church came in, I think, AD 606. So just subtract 606 from AD 51. They didn't know anyone like this. But the coming of the Lord, this man was already sitting in the most holy place, and the coming of the Lord is to destroy him. This is how we have to understand it. Okay, and it says that I have to end here, and because I have a place to go, by the way, with the breath of his mouth, and destroy with the brightness of his coming. The brightness there is that Greek word epiphania. That is manifestation of divinity. So in the context, has to do with the return of the Lord. So when the Lord comes, will be the time when he destroyed this man who sits in the most holy place. And that is what most holy place in the Jerusalem temple. And that is what occurred in the 70 AD when the temple was destroyed. When Eliza Ben Simon was destroyed at fortress of Masada. When all his angels, when all his ministers were destroyed in that judgment. Okay, so this little horn, I think I have spent a lot, so I'll have to terminate the video. But we will talk about that, which John also spoke about in Revelation chapter 12, excuse me, and in Revelation chapter number 13, to link the three together. That Revelation chapter 12 is also import of Daniel chapter 7, just as we have it in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. So the man of sin is that same little horn spoken of by Daniel in Daniel chapter 7. And the abomination of desolation, I have to talk about it, maybe perhaps when I have time. So, Brother David Muleta, yeah. All right, we will talk about. I appreciate your being with me, and I believe the name is David Mulieti. Yeah, David Mulieti. So we will talk, on the flip side. So we meet again. Say bye.